So hello, welcome back to the channel, and this one is for the early subscribers. If you remember, all the way back to 2017, I did say that I'd ordered a McLaren 720S, and finally, here it is. Obviously, I'm joking. I ended up cancelling that order. We got into a McLaren 675 LT, ran that car for 10,000 miles, and ultimately I got interested in other brands. And honestly, I'm quite glad I waited because the values of these today are fantastic, as is the performance, the styling, and what we've got planned for it. So, as this is a Velocity Edition 720S, let's immerse you in all of the beautiful details, but more importantly, what is planned for this car, because it sure as hell isn't staying like this. Okay, this is where the journey of this car starts with the wheels, and it really is just the beginning, because together with the announcement of this car, I'm really excited to announce the beginning of our project car series. We've dabbled a little bit in the past. We have mentioned that we're looking to repaint the Aston Martin DBS in Lennox Green, which is going to take us down the project journey, and there's some other things coming in the future. However, that's what this thing's for. This is going to be a full-blown, how far can we take a McLaren 720S project car, starting with the wheels. This is just a small nod to the fact that we are actually going to do this. So we've taken the stock ones off. Now, as it happens, it came as spec'd with gold wheels on it. So we wanted to sort of complement that. But these are Vossen forged alloys. They are staggered, so 20 at the front, 21 at the rear, and clad on Michelin tires. Now, just while we're here on the topic of the wheels, behind those sits a lovely set of carbon ceramic brakes. Now, while the brakes in isolation are, of course, fantastic things, they reduce weight versus steel brakes. Not that McLaren's ever come with steel brakes, but the advantage is the unsprung mass which sits on the wheel, improving handling. The really cool thing is, together with the fact that the car is so lightweight, a 720S can stop from 62 miles an hour to dead stop in just under 30 meters. That's pretty impressive stuff, right? So this is where the lack of weight really comes in to play in the performance world. So it's also going to come into play when we give this thing a disproportionate amount of horsepower soon. So that's where this journey starts. Now, without giving too much away, we have a very exciting exhaust project. It's bespoke, it's a one of one. We've been working in collaboration with a very special company to make something very bespoke that will hopefully add to not only the sound and theatre of this car, but also the overall performance, because we're going to try and turn the wick up on this as far as we possibly can. And there's also going to be some substantial body style rearrangements. Let's just leave it at that. We'll transition onto that in the near future. Now, right now, I know the camera isn't picking up on one of the unique features of the Velocity Edition 720S, which is the paint gradient. So down here, super dark. Up here, it gets lighter red. But more importantly, if you get closer in, you can see it goes from solid paint to translucent lacquer that reveals the carbon weave of the bonnet. It's such a nice touch. That was one of the signature features of the Velocity Edition at the Geneva Motor Show. It had a full graded paint where it went from very dark, super rich red hue all the way to quite a light Velocity red hue. Now, interestingly, there is a McLaren Senna out there somewhere, just one, which is painted in this exact paint job, and on the Senna, it costs around about $100,000. So that's kind of how special this is. As I mentioned, values of 720s now are fantastic. Performance per pound, difficult to beat this thing, and our plan is to make that performance ratio even more disproportionate on the tuning journey. Okay, so this is a now iconic design feature, which I love referring back to, because when this car launched, the headlight cluster was controversial. People just weren't sure. And I actually got it. If you weren't at the show and you didn't see it in reality and have time to move your head around and realize that in true McLaren fashion, this was functional aero design, check this out. I put my hands around this light bar. These are completely hollow. They act as induction chambers for the radiators that sit behind them, both left and right, different cooling mechanisms, and they look cool, but you've got to see it in person. There's so much depth to it, so much sculpture. When it first launched, people were like, it's kind of like an empty eye socket, there needs to be something else in there. But now I think it's come full circle. It looks awesome. Okay, just want to draw your attention to this line here. Now, it ties in quite nicely with another innovation that McLaren introduced on the 720S, which is the double skin doors. You see, on most supercars, you would see an air intake. like a big vent right about there. This still has one, but it's quite nicely disguised into the design of the car. You see it channels down here and falls down this cave here, which is part of the door. And I'm not joking when I say this, look at that. That's why this car is so cool. I mean, that is just the most beautiful sculptured door I think I've ever seen. It's magnificent, look at that. And again, while it looks cool, it's also functional, and that channels air into the air intake down here. What a thing. Okay, just quickly before we move on to further details and plans for this car, a quick overview for anyone who isn't familiar. McLaren 720S. 720 stands for 720 PS, which translates to around about 710 horsepower. It has just over 560, I think it's 568 pounds-feet of torque, and the car weighs mid 1,400 kilograms. So in terms of power to weight ratio, it is well in favor of pulling on your smile glands. In terms of 0 to 60 time, it's sub 3 seconds. It's around about 2.8-ish, which coincidentally is similar of that to a 911 Turbo S, which we did up until this car have on the channel. Anyone familiar with the channel over the last 12 months will know that we had a gentian blue 992 Turbo S on the channel wearing this number plate. Now the Turbo S is now gone in Part X against this car, and the reason for that was I actually wasn't using it as much as I thought I would. As a kid growing up, the Turbo S for me was a genuine dream car. Lived with that thing for 12 months, found myself gravitating to other cars. It's a phenomenal package, but it's quite a daily driver. Ridiculous pace, but didn't quite have the theatre of something like this. And then when we thought, you know what, I'd love to develop a project series on the channel, this thing screamed at me, having very similar performance, but in a thoroughbred supercar package. So Turbo S is gone. There'll be more on that story soon. And the Mr. 11 JWW plate has now made its way onto another daily driver turbocharged car. Only, I think you'll agree, this delivers that daily driver experience with a lot more excitement. Now we've got active aero on this car, similar to the Senna, which we introduced on the channel just a few days ago. Active aero wing, which helps to reduce drag or increase it depending on if you're under heavy acceleration or heavy braking. Now then, we can't talk about a project car without talking about the exhaust, of which this already has the optional extra sports exhaust upgrade. So it sounds pretty fruity by 720S standards, but of course, there's more news to come on that. We are not playing around when it comes to this thing. It's gonna be really cool and hopefully really flamey. So this is running Proactive Chassis Control version 2. Now, famously, McLaren launched a game-changing hydraulically linked suspension setup back on the 650S, and this is running a heavily revised version of that. So heavily revised that McLaren actually sponsored a Cambridge team of mathematics students to develop the algorithm for this suspension system. I'm not joking, you can go and Google that. The sensors and the road reading ability of this car to help with traction, squat, yaw, grip, even slip angle. And that's really important to mention, because while this thing is incredibly good at hunting down an apex, on this car, McLaren even developed a drift mode, an actual drift mode where you can program with the slide of a finger on the infotainment screen in the central console. You could slide at your desired angle of control. And all of this has come out of a bunch of mathematic ninjas out of Cambridge University. So if any one of you is watching, thank you so much, because you have graced us with some wonderful automotive engineering. And hopefully one day we'll take this on track and show you how that variable drift control comes into play. Now then, speaking of the MSO options and the tech on the inside, I think it's only right now to introduce you to the interior of our wonderful project car. Now, just before we get into the intricacies of this wonderful interior, I feel compelled to say a big thank you to our channel sponsors, Charles and Dean Finance. If it wasn't for those guys, days like this would otherwise not be possible. And I think it's fantastic service because they're really one-on-one. I speak to Tom and Simon there quite often. That's the biggest differentiator with these guys. They begin to learn your personal circumstances, get on the phone and go, do you know what? Can we make this happen? I think you'll be surprised. Okay, welcome to the now more than familiar interior of a McLaren 720S, but let's touch on some potentially forgotten fact. You see, this is running mono cage 2, which is the revised carbon fiber cell that McLaren developed for the 720S. It was ultimately an evolution of the tub of the 650S, but it's all above the cell here. So all of this tub here, beautifully sculpted away. It's been sort of carved out here. Not sure if you recall, on a 650S and a 675 LT, there was this big box section of tub here, which kind of made it quite difficult to get in and out of because you had to step over a block here. But on this, it's been sculpted away, scalloped and refined to make ingress, egress, that's automotive terms for getting in and out, much easier. The other significant point of it, it greatly improved the torsional rigidity of the tub, which is great in coupe version, but when they subsequently launched the Spider version, the torsional rigidity of that was fantastic. It allowed them to use a lot less steel in the tub, reducing the chassis weight by 18 kilograms and dropping the center of gravity by 3%. All of these sound trivial things, but ultimately add up to a fantastic driving experience. As petrol heads out there, we know less weight, more power makes us smile. Now, let's talk about the interior and go straight on to the most significant MSO option in here, which is the matte red carbon fiber steering wheel with velocity red 12 o'clock marker on the top of the wheel, plus matching red carbon fiber shift panels. Additionally, there's not too many MSO options, but what there is Alcantara everything. Like absolutely everything in here, full headliner, even the straps which hold in your bags are made of Alcantara. It's a beautiful place to be. Because this was a successor to the 911 Turbo S on the channel, we did go for a spec which had, I guess, a comfort seat really. Like, they're still incredibly purposeful, they're snug, they hold you in, but they're not quite as hardcore as the full-on carbon fiber sports seats that would have debuted in the McLaren 675 LT, and certainly not as hardcore as the seats in our Senna, but nonetheless full of Alcantara, nice contrast trim in leather on this central section here. And fun fact, when I originally spec'd the McLaren 720S, which I ended up not going for in the end, I had these exact same seats in them, so it's really funny how things work out. And then, of course, one of the cool things which debuted on the 720 is this instrument cluster here, which retracts. It folds and retracts away depending on what driver mode you're in. The idea is that when you're in track mode, it retracts to this single screen here to get all of the unnecessary clutter out of the way, giving you only what you need on track, mostly to do with temperatures of the car, speed, gear shifts, things like that. So, super cool place to be. Okay, and then down here we've got the drive select switches. Now there are many variables to this. Effectively, this independently controls the transmission from the chassis and suspension control. So you can have it all in comfort, like so. The extremes are you can have the handling and comfort and the transmission and throttle response in track. So say you're on a poorly surfaced road, but you still want the dynamic driving experience of the car in track mode, you can do that. So it would iron out the bumps, but still give you a dynamic driving experience. And then when you put it into active, you can customize all of those settings. And that's when you can hold down ESC off, turn everything off and you're on your own, or put it into variable drift mode. It's a cool system, but you know, back in 2017, even though there's been software updates for this thing, no Apple CarPlay or anything like that. Also a little fun detail, there's almost a sort of hidden pocket in there, which folds open, no problem at all. Keep your sunglasses and things like that in there. Closes like so. However, when you open the door, it's locked. It's got this little catch that knows the door's open. The purpose of that is so that your stuff doesn't fall out of it and hit the tarmac. So one of the other awesome features about these doors is that as they open, they actually effectively remove a section of the roof of the car, which means getting in and out is just way easier. You don't have to think about ducking under a roof line. So getting in and out of the car, way easier too. There's these things you don't really think about until they're pointed out, and it makes this a proper daily driver supercar, which when you look at it from the outside, because it's so berserk, and that for me is why this car is a really interesting alternative to the Turbo S. Okay, so there we have it. The latest introduction to the channel. That's the 4th addition to the garage this week. I cannot believe what's happening. But what's different about this car, it genuinely and truly is going to become a project car. And on that note, we really want to hear from you. What would you like to see us do with this thing? We already have some plans, and it's quite invasive. We're not just going to put a few wheels on it and, you know, sort of tweak it with some stickers. It's going to be a full-on project car. So let us know what you'd like to see. Any ideas, be sure to share them with us on Instagram at Mr. JWW. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we shall see you next time. Ciao.